Beijing has set out to target specific American goods with retaliatory taxes, following the blanket 10% tariff introduced by Trump on all Chinese imports to the US. This came on top of existing measures, bringing the tariffs imposed up to around 30%. Trump is taking aim at Beijing's massive trade surplus. China sold $1 trillion more in goods and services last year than it bought, as its exports swamped the globe.
The deficit with China is about $1 trillion. Think of it, $1 trillion. They're using our money to build their military.
When the U.S. imposed a new wave of tariffs on China in February 2025, the expectation was straightforward. Economic pressure would compel China to concede. However, that's not what occurred. Instead, China retaliated with a strategy years in the making, targeting not only American products but also the foundation of America's economic influence. They have indeed imposed tariffs on key industries, but that's merely the surface. Behind the scenes, China is securing vital supply chains, tightening its grip on rare resources, and negotiating deals with U.S. rivals to undermine America's global leverage. This isn't merely about immediate retaliation. It's about gradually shifting the balance of power. Today, we're unpacking it all: what's happening, why it matters, and how it's altering the world economy. The U.S. ignited economic tensions by imposing new tariffs on over $60 billion worth of Chinese goods. This wasn't an abrupt decision. It was part of Trump's continuous effort to revive American manufacturing. The new tariffs impacted crucial sectors: computer components, electric vehicle materials, and essential resources required for modern technology. The aim was to compel China to alter its trade practices, but the reality is that it triggered a response that extended far beyond mere trade. While the U.S. portrayed it as a means to protect American jobs, China perceived it as an attack not just on its economy, but on its global standing. China's response wasn't rushed or emotional. Within days, they announced tariffs on $35 billion worth of American goods, concentrating on agriculture, energy, and automotive sectors. However, it's not just about what they targeted, it's about the locations involved. China focused on industries linked to significant political regions in the U.S., soybeans from the Midwest and oil from Texas. This was not merely about damaging the economy, it was about applying pressure from within the U.S., recognizing that the affected businesses would resist these policies. But that's just one part. Beyond tariffs, China has made new trade deals with countries like Brazil, Russia, and even Mexico, finding new suppliers to lessen their dependence on American goods. While the U.S. focused on applying pressure, China was quietly constructing a new strategy. While most people were fixated on tariffs, China subtly employed one of its strongest economic tools: rare earth minerals. These materials are essential for producing items like smartphones, electric cars, and military equipment. China controls over 80% of the world's supply. Following the new U.S. tariffs, China hinted it might restrict the export of these materials to the U.S. This wasn't just a warning, it was a clever strategy to exert pressure on the industries the U.S. relies on for both business and security. Consider attempting to build advanced technology without the necessary raw materials. That's the kind of quiet yet significant pressure China is exerting, not through loud threats, but by controlling the resources the world depends on. China didn't stop at farming products. They targeted America's energy industry by imposing new taxes on U.S. oil and liquefied natural gas. This is significant because China was one of the largest buyers of American energy in recent years. The consequences were swift. U.S. energy companies lost contracts, shipments were delayed, and profits declined. Simultaneously, China recalibrated its focus, forging energy deals with Russia, nations in the Middle East, and enhancing its own energy production to reduce reliance on the U.S. This isn't merely a short-term issue. Even if tariffs are lifted later, those new energy agreements may persist, resulting in lost income and influence for the U.S. in one of the world's largest markets. While products like steel and soybeans attract attention, the true battle lies in technology. The U.S. attempted to limit China's access to advanced tech by banning the sale of crucial computer chips and preventing companies like Huawei from conducting business with American firms. China's reaction was to invest heavily in its own technology. The government invested in developing its own computer chips, enhancing artificial intelligence, and constructing faster 5G networks, all aimed at reducing reliance on U.S. technology. However, here's the twist. Rather than hindering China, these measures may have actually empowered them. Chinese tech companies are now crafting products that can compete with or even surpass American ones. This is not just a trade conflict anymore. It's a race to determine who will lead the future of global technology, and China is narrowing the gap rapidly. China holds over $800 billion in U.S. government debt, while selling all of it at at once would hurt China as well. Even small changes in their purchasing can shake up the global economy. After the new tariffs, China quietly began buying less U.S. debt, causing a ripple effect that made it more expensive for the U.S. government to borrow money. This led to higher interest rates for things like home loans, car loans, and credit cards. It's a subtle form of economic pressure, but it's very effective. The U.S. relies on countries like China to help finance its debt. If China pulls back even slightly, it creates financial issues that can't be resolved with tariffs. One of China's most strategic moves is building stronger relationships with other countries. While the U.S. was imposing tariffs, China was forging new trade agreements with the European Union, Southeast Asian nations, and even strengthening its partnerships with Russia and Latin America. The objective is straightforward: to reduce dependence on the U.S. while expanding China's influence in other markets. This strategy goes beyond merely avoiding tariffs. It aims to create a global network where the U.S. has diminished control. For American businesses, this implies more than just losing Chinese customers. It signals facing new competition in markets where the U.S. previously held an advantage. As China fortifies its global position, American companies may find it increasingly challenging to keep pace. While the U.S. and China were grabbing headlines, Canada and Mexico were grappling with their own issues. Both faced U.S. tariffs, prompting them to impose tariffs in response. Canada targeted American agricultural products, while Mexico increased taxes on items such as steel, pork, and whiskey. Here's where it gets intriguing. As tensions escalated, both Canada and Mexico began forging stronger trade ties with China. This shift could diminish America's influence right in its own backyard, transforming former close partners into nations that depend less on the U.S. and more on China. The biggest impacts of this trade war aren't just the tariffs. It's how global supply chains are being reshaped. For years, the U.S. and many other countries heavily relied on China for manufacturing. However, with rising tariffs and tensions, companies are rethinking that strategy. China anticipated this. They've been investing in countries such as Vietnam, Indonesia, and parts of Africa to establish new supply routes that don't depend on U.S. partnerships. This not only helps China avoid future tariff risks, but also fosters stronger ties with developing economies. For Canadian companies, this means higher costs to relocate production and longer timelines to adapt. It's not merely a short-term disruption, it's a permanent change in how goods are produced and transported around the world. American farmers are among the hardest hit in this trade war. China was one of the largest buyers of Canadian agricultural products like soybeans, corn, and pork. However, after the tariffs, China reduced its purchases, turning to countries such as Brazil and Argentina instead. For farmers, this meant crops with nowhere to go, declining prices, and increasing debts. Some received government bailouts to cover their losses, but that's only a temporary fix. The real issue is long-term. Once China finds new suppliers, they may not return to Canadian farms even if tariffs are lifted later. This isn't just an economic issue, it's a political one. Farming communities are vital voters, and their frustration is putting pressure on Canadian leaders to rethink their approach. When countries impose tariffs on each other, it's not just businesses that suffer. Everyday people do as well, facing higher prices on goods ranging from electronics and clothing to food and household items. Many product prices have risen due to the trade war. Businesses encountering increased import costs often pass those expenses on to consumers. For instance, smartphones that depend on Chinese-made parts are now pricier. Groceries that previously came from international suppliers have increased in cost due to tariffs on agricultural products. It's a hidden tax that appears at the checkout without most people realizing its connection to global trade tensions. Global markets despise uncertainty, and the U.S.-China trade war has generated ample of it. Whenever new tariffs are announced or trade discussions falter, stock markets respond, sometimes with significant declines. Investors are not only concerned about the immediate costs of tariffs, they fret over the implications for economic growth, corporate profits, and the stability of global supply chains. Major corporations that depend on international trade, such as tech giants and automotive manufacturers, often experience drastic fluctuations in their stock prices based on the latest trade updates. This volatility affects not just Wall Street, it also has repercussions for retirement accounts, pensions, and investments for everyday Canadians. An unstable market translates to increased risk and diminished financial security for millions. While the US and China remain at the heart of this trade war, its effects are felt globally. Countries that depend on trade with both nations are experiencing the squeeze. For instance, Southeast Asian countries are encountering supply chain disruptions, while European firms face increased costs when importing goods linked to US-China trade. Even developing nations that provide raw materials to China are impacted when demand declines. This ripple effect indicates that the trade war is not just a challenge for two countries, it is dampening global economic growth, raising costs worldwide, and generating uncertainty for businesses and governments everywhere. When two of the world's largest economies collide, the shockwaves reach every corner of the globe. So where does this all lead? The truth is, no one knows for sure. Trade wars are easy to start, but difficult to end. Even if the US and China reach a new agreement, the damage to business relationships, supply chains, and political trust has already been done. China is clearly focused on becoming less dependent on the US, investing in its own industries, forging new alliances, and striving for global leadership in technology and finance. For the US, the challenge lies in maintaining its economic influence while facing stronger global competition, not just from China, but from the new networks being developed by China. The big question isn't merely about tariffs. It's about what the next phase of US-China relations will look like in a rapidly changing world. The US-China trade war extends beyond tariffs. It's influencing the future of the global economy. China isn't acting haphazardly. Every step is part of a broader strategy to realign economic power. The crucial question is, who is positioning themselves to lead in the coming years? Is the US strategy maintaining strength, or is China subtly gaining ground? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd genuinely like to hear